Greetings, brethren, and welcome to this UPA7.org presentation, where we will look at the recent attack of Bashan declaring full assault on the various Carmel associations. This is something that has popped up recently on Facebook. So here are the probing questions we're going to look at in this situation. Why is Trevor Bingham, who's the head or the leader of Bashan, their Porter president, attacking the foundation of Salem and Mt associations in particular? Are the arguments presented logically sound? And what are the real motives for this Bashan attack? What are they up to? And finally, are Trevor's attempts to exalt Bashan going to really work in the end? So these are the questions we want to address in this presentation. So put on your seatbelt and get ready. We'll begin with this text for meditation. We'll read this passage coming from the Jezreel letter number 2, page 7. It reads, "Can't you see that the Spirit which is now manifesting itself through these truth-hating brethren is the very Spirit which manifests itself through the Jews and through the enemies of truth during the Protestant Reformation, and also in the beginning of the 1844 movement? Do you not see that because they cannot attack this message on its own merits, they get personal, attack the men in charge, and resort to character defamation, to gossip and falsehood, to anything in the hope of turning you against the message and the messenger? The spirit of prophecy predicted the crime in these words: I saw that the very spirit of perjury that would turn truth into falsehood, good into evil, and innocence into crime is now active. Satan exalts over the condition of God's professed peoples." Testimonies of Church, Volume 5, pages 94 and 95. So, brethren, we're going to see how this same spirit that opposed, the ministry of Jesus, that opposed the Protestant Reformation, that opposed the rise of the Second Advent movement in 1844, is very much alive and well today in our midst. Would you believe that professed Davidians would oppose other Davidians in advancing the original Shepherd's Rod message? Well, brethren, we're going to show the case. Here, Bashan attacking Carmel pasture. So Trevor begins here with this post on Facebook by attacking Salem. And we're going to read a quote here. He declares Salem was founded on a lie. The lie, as detailed by Brother Adair in my previous post, was this. Brother Houteff said that the Salem rest home was to be the new Mount Carmel. And this was posted in the Bashan DSTA Facebook group on September 30th, 2021. So, what's our response? This claim is based on hearsay. A recorded or documented statement as to what Brother Houteff said, word for word, to elder nations is not available anywhere. Different versions as to what was said vary depending on who you talk to. The idea that Brother Houteff said that there were going to be additional Mount Carmel centers after 1955 is ludicrous. We cannot find it in the Rod. Now, I myself was a member of Salem about 20 years ago, and I did hear Don Adair make reference to the fact that Brother Houteff did visit the Salem rest home in the 1940s. That's recorded in the old codes. So obviously he was there, and he had discussions with the brethren, including Elder Nations, who was the minister who led that Seventh-day Adventist church to become a Davidian church with the Smith family and so forth. And from what I remember, it was that Brother Houteff indicated to Elder Nations or whoever was there that the Salem location would be important in God's work in the future. Something to that effect. But the idea that he specifically stated that this would be a new Mount Carmel, I don't ever remember that. I've talked to other members of the Salem Association, and they don't remember being referred to specifically that way. So what do we end up with here? As we're basing a claim, a very serious charge, based merely on hearsay. Nobody has a written, documented statement of what Brother Houteff actually said to elder nations. Now, as it turns out, that Salem Association there, or the Salem Rest Home, would indeed have a role in the future of God's work as a publishing house. And we've documented that in a series of videos on the history of God's storehouse from Genesis to Revelation. So that's irrefutable. But to make the claim that Brother Houteff stated that it would be a new Mount Carmel, we don't know. Now, let's look at another misleading claim that Trevor makes. This is in a statement posted on their Facebook group September 26, 2021. Trevor states, God, through his living prophet, led out in locating Waco. God, through his living word in the Leviticus, guided the 1961 session location committee in locating the headquarters for the Davidian Seventh-day Adventist Association in Missouri. Oh, really? Now, we have done a lot of research on that 61 session, and we believe that was a pivotal reorganization to oppose the apostasy of Florence Houteff and Ben Roden in the bogus branch. But this claim that at that 61 session that they decided to relocate to Missouri? Here's our reply. This statement is false. The 61 reorganization voted against trying to reestablish near Waco, Texas, and decided to set up the association in Arlington, California. The relocation of the Bashan faction to Exeter, Missouri took place after the 1962 split with the Vista group under the direction of Brother Warden. Now, let's look at the proof of this, that Trevor's lying. He's making false statements. So here is a copy of the 61 session code, and if anybody would like a copy, we'd be happy to provide them with a complete copy. But we're going to highlight the particular portion of this code on page 8 and 9 where they discuss this situation about location of headquarters. So we'll read it highlighted in yellow. Early in the agenda, came the concern as to the location of headquarters. This proved to be the most difficult problem of the session. Some were of the opinion that it must, in view of one or two statements in the rod, be the Lord's will that we somehow gain control of Old Mount Carmel. That's in Waco, Texas. That we might carry on and finish the work from there. A study from the Bible and the rod was presented to us by Brother Bingham, proving conclusively that there are 3 places of spiritual pasture where God's people are to feed. See 2SR, page 243. The study went on to show that since the Carmel of the rod, Old Mount Carmel, is no more, and since Gilead is the kingdom, see Jeremiah 51:8 and 46:11 and 12, we are therefore now in the Bashan period and must accordingly get our meat in due season from the rod in Bashan. This entire study will be published as soon as possible. Next paragraph. The delegates unanimously concurred that the evidence is conclusive that the Carmel period is past, and that therefore we are not to try to even to hope to want to return to Carmel. During the extended discussions of the matter, a number of prospective sites were considered, but were found in one way or another to fall short of meeting our needs. It was therefore decided to establish temporary headquarters in Arlington, California, and to ask the Executive Council to appoint a location committee to work on this problem. So here we see that the decision, the majority wanted to go back to Waco, but Bingham gives a study and convinces them that Carmel's withered, and now we're in Bashan pasture, and so they decided they couldn't find a location, but they decided to set up a temporary headquarters in Arlington. No discussion about going to Missouri at all. It wasn't even mentioned. Now, this is interesting because it shows you that this symbolic code is not under direct authorization to be published like the old codes that were under the direction of Brother Houteff, because in this is introduced the error that the idea that Carmel pasture is withered, and we're now in Bashan. Now, this caught people off guard. It seemed to win the day as far as God not wanting to go back to Waco, but the implications of this can only be understood as time unrolled as we look back. And the problem here is that Bashan fails to distinguish between Mount Carmel Center, that existed from 1935 to 1955 and then sold off by 1957, its physical geographical location, and Carmel pasture, which is independent of location, which is a period of probation allotted to Seventh-day Adventist Church, which will conclude at Ezekiel 9. Now, we have a video on that topic. Check the link in the description box below if you're not familiar with this. But Bashan creates all kinds of confusion because they do not distinguish between Mount Carmel Center and Carmel pasture. And here's proof of that confusion coming from the mind of Bingham. But this is proof that the decision to go to Missouri was not even on the radar. And here's proof. Here's a letter that shows that Bashan moved to Missouri in 1970. This comes from a letter from the Bashan publications called The History of the DSDA Association. And I quote, this is a photograph. The worldwide headquarters of the association was established in 1935 at Mount Carmel Center, Waco, Texas, on a 385-acre plot where it remained until after his death, February 5, 1955. After an interim residence of 9 years in Southern California, the association was relocated in May 1970 when the office and publishing work were moved here to rural southwestern Missouri. So I'm sorry, Trevor, but the 61 session did not decide to go to Missouri. That happened 9 years later. So you are lying, okay? Also, there's even more behind us. We won't go into it here, but the question is, how did Bashan acquire this land in southwest Missouri? I'll give you a hint. It was acquired by fraud and deceit, okay? They extorted it out of the brother and sister Johnson. If you want to know more about that, please contact us. We'll fill you in. But this proves that the move to Bashan out to Missouri was in 1970. So let's look at some more facts about the 62 split. See, Bashan talks about, the 61 reorganization, and we acknowledge that that was instrumental. God brought up those Davidians to oppose Florence in her apostasy, but Bashan doesn't like to talk about what happened in 1962. Bashan tends to avoid any real inquiry of what happened in 1962 when the, quote, 100% route-only Davidians that reorganized in 61 split into two factions, one led by Brother Harry Warden and the other by M.J. Bingham. This begs the question, if there is a split in an association resulting in two factions, then the essential question becomes, who's right and who's wrong? What are the criteria for making such a decision? Now, Bashan people will argue and say, well, you weren't there, so you can't decide. Nonsense. This is rubbish. This is an effort to divert from the real topic. There's plenty of evidence for today us to weigh the evidences and make a decision who is right and who is wrong. Okay? So they try to decoy people from really looking at the issues involved. And fundamentally what it is the demands of M.J. Bingham as, quote, editor of the publishing department was the fundamental root of the controversy that led to the split. He wanted total control over everything that was published. And there were brethren that said, wait a minute, we don't want a dictator in our midst, which is exactly what Bingham was. So that was the root of the controversy. We have plenty of documents, letters and so forth, discussing this very problem. Then the assumed role of the, quote, standing committee in this drama is also overlooked. Now, we just did a video presentation on this, about this bogus standing committee of Bingham and Don Adair as the standing committee chairman to usurp or take control of the assets of the association. That's a really startling thing. The whole thing is unauthorized. But if you haven't, please see the link in the description box below on that video about the authority of this bogus standing committee. Brethren, do your homework and don't be fooled by cunningly devised fables. So let's look at this brief historical timeline for the shepherd's rod. Now, we've covered this in more detail in other presentations on the history of God's storehouse, but we'll just review it here. So 1930, Universal Publishing Association started in Los Angeles, California. 1935, they moved the publishing work to headquarters, Mount Carmel Center, Waco, Texas. And then 1955, Brother Houteff dies. Okay. And then we had the rise of usurpers that Brother Houteff warned us about. The first, of course, being Ben Roden's bogus branch that continues on to this day. Then Florence Houteff usurped and took over the association the day after Brother Houteff died, destroyed the office of president, had herself inserted as vice president, and God allowed her 7 years before her and her council, after blunder, false prediction, remodeling the whole Rod literature, finally resigns in disgrace in 1962 and put an end to the new Mount Carmel Center. However, thankfully, God had honest Davidians that called themselves 100% Rod only that reorganized in 1961 to oppose Florence and to rescue the original Rod message to its original estate. Their sole mandate was to republish the original tract literature and to train Bible workers. That was it. You can go look at that session code. That was the essence of their bylaws. Those two mandates. That's it. No more, no less. Well, the next year there was a dispute between Bingham and Warden. It was between Bingham's desire to control the publishing work, and that resulted in the 62 split. And two factions arose, Bingham and the Bashan pastor and Brother Warden, who maintained the Vista Association. Once again, begging the question, who's right and who's wrong? Somebody had to be right. God had to be leading somebody. He can't be leading two different groups with two different teachings. Later, so there's Bingham's Bashan pastor, which continues to this day. 1970, it's interesting that the association in Southern California under Warden decided to relocate to Salem in 1970 on the basis of studying Ezekiel 47, a doctrine that Bashan does not believe in. It's interesting that that very year, as we just documented, that Bashan also moved from California, but not all the way to the East Coast, but they moved to the middle of the country, into Missouri. Another fact that some people aren't aware of, that Don Adair was a disciple, a lieutenant under Bingham for all those years, and then broke away from Bingham in the late 60s and then joined up with the Salem group. 74, there was a split. Adair usurped, took over the association, and brethren that opposed his false teachings in the unauthorized symbolic code that they published resulted in a split, once again, with the origin of Don Adair taking control of the association. He calls it Salem, but it's actually in Tomasi, South Carolina, and then the group of faithful Davidians that reorganized back in Yucaipa, California. So that's the origin of Salem under Don Adair, who's been there all the way to this day. It's about to be usurped by another clever artificer, Samuel Gonzalez. That's another story. So in 86, these brethren that had been kicked out by the Salem Association in 1982, they were around the Mount Dale area, discovered the older Davidians back in Yucaipa who had the printing work, the printing plates, and the original literature. And by a providence of God, they joined together in 1986, and Mount Dale became the place that published the original Rod tract literature up until about 2005. Now, 91, there was another rebellion, and there was a split organized by Norman Archer, and that resulted in the new Waco, as we call it, the idea to go back to Waco in these days. And so that's under the leadership of Norman Archer. That was another counterfeit. And then Mount Dale kept alive the original tract literature in facsimile reprints up until about 2005. And then out of 2006, out of the city, UPA7.org arose for the sole purpose to fulfill the mandate in the 61 session, which is to republish the original tract literature, just like Brother Houteff did, and to train Bible workers. So there is this section, we call it the scattering period. And you can obviously see all of these various factions. And that's a fulfillment of Zechariah 13:7. So there's our historical timeline, and that's part of a detailed 6-part series we have in the History of God's Storehouse that we published in 2010. If you haven't seen that, then please do. This will give you all the evidence to identify who God has used to preserve the truth of his message throughout the ages, up to the present day. We also need to refute other misleading claims by Trevor. So he made this statement on his Facebook group September 26. He's going after Mountvale now. Anything to do with Carmel pasture. It is not surprising that Mountvale is not centrally located at all, since Mountvale brethren were led there by a false prophet. Being led of the enemy in a very real way resulted in Mountvale brethren being stuck in high, cold location, far away from the center. Satan put them where he wanted them out of the way. So Trevor here is trying to destroy the whole foundation of Mountvale because he claims that they were suggested a place to relocate by a false prophet. Of course, this was Salem and Mt. Now, we're going to look at two things. This idea, the central location, and the claim that Mountvale relocated to their current location because of a suggestion of a false prophet. Does that prove they're wrong? Well, what's our reply? This statement is grossly misleading. The argument for being centrally located in Waco, Texas in the period from 1935 to 1955 does not apply today. Trevor ignores the role of Mountvale in preserving the original Shepherd's Rod tract literature in the period from 1986 to 2005. He also avoids the full and proper teaching on the river of Ezekiel 47. Remember, these two branches, the Vista Association under Warden and Bingham's bogus Bashan pasture, both moved eastward in 1947. But Bashan didn't do so based on Ezekiel 47. They stopped in the middle of the country in Missouri. But Mountvale is on the east coast. So the idea that Ezekiel River has something to do with the movement of God's storehouse is something that Bashan totally ignores. Now, regarding the fact that Mountvale bought their property because Solomon ben David suggested to him this would be a good place to move to, Mountvale's reply is, oh, well, he wasn't a member of us. Well, that's a fairly weak defense. We could easily argue that because Mountvale took advice from a false prophet, God later moved the publishing house work when they no longer published the original tract literature. It's really a non-issue, okay? Because they listened to it, maybe that's the reason they were only there temporarily. And they no longer published the original work. It's moved away from them. They don't want to acknowledge it, but those are the facts. Let's look at this Trevor's deceptive use of the old codes. He put up this graphic showing, okay, there on the left-hand side, there's Southern California and the western coast of the United States. And then over here on the eastern part is Mountvale. And he said, way out of the way. But here we are, in southern Missouri. And then he puts this quote from the rod. It has been evident for some time it would soon be necessary to seek a more central location for the office. Volume 1, Symbolic Code, number 10, page 3. This was published by Brother Houteff in 1934. Does this apply to the situation today with Bashan in 2021? And the answer is absolutely not. Trevor is misapplying this statement completely out of context. Let's look at the evidence. And the arguments, why did Brother Houteff make this for moving to Texas in 1935 compared to what the situation is happening today? So let's expose Trevor's faulty logic. First, Trevor's misuse of Symbolic Code Volume 1, number 10, page 3 to justify Bashan's location today in the state of Missouri is fundamentally disingenuous and outright deception. Why? The demographic situation of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in the time frame from 1935 to 1955 is grossly different than the situation today, and we're going to prove that in the next slide. The means to distribute the original Shepherd's Rod tract literature are very different today compared to what was available in Brother Houteff's day. And here's some facts. We'll go over that. But one of the things that Brother Houteff published in the Old Codes is the postage was dependent on distance. So the idea of being in the middle of the country was going to save a lot of money for shipping tract literature. That was the primary means to spread the raw literature. The message was mailing through the mail, through the tracts. And so it was going to be less expensive to be in the middle of the country where the distance was different than being on the West Coast. So that was one of the primary criteria. Is that true today? And the answer is no. We have media mail within the U.S., but what about the demographics? We're going to look at that. The means to reach 22 plus Seventh-day Adventists worldwide today cannot be met from one location in the United States. The remedy to this is found in 7 Testimonies, page 140. Multiple publishing houses worldwide. So let's look at this demographic of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Facts matter. In 1935, the membership of the Seventh-day Adventist Church was approximately 300,000 worldwide. Now, let's look at the demographic breakdown by region. Most of those were in NAD. That's the North American division. That's where most Adventists were located. The next largest group was the European division. And then after that, we have Asia at 14%, Latin and South America 13%, and then Africa only 6%. So that was the situation in 1935. Let's contrast it with the situation today. Here's the membership 2020 of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, around 22 million. Look at this demographic, radically different. Look at the largest section of the pie now, 41% from Africa. In 1935, it was only 6%. So we got a radical shift. Latin America, the Inter-American division, 30%. Asians, about the same chunk at 19%. North America, from the largest section down to 6%. Oceania, a small section, 3%. And European, about 1%. So do you see the demographic shift? The growth in the Seventh-day Adventist Church has been largely outside North America and the European divisions. It's shifted dramatically, and the largest growth has been in the African continent and Latin America, and to some extent Asia. That's over almost 80% of the whole world field is outside the United States. So the argument of justifying being in a central location to send a literature out to reach the Adventist Church is totally null and void. How are we going to reach these people in Africa? Well, the obvious answer is set up publishing houses over there in Africa. But guess what? Bashan doesn't believe that. Neither does Mountaindale. So let's do a quick overview of the relocation of the storehouse movements from the period 1935 to 2005. Of course, the work started in Southern California. From 1930 to 1935, moved to Waco, Texas, in the period from 1935 to 1962. When Florence ran it into the ground, they resigned. But the faithful Davidians reorganized, so the storehouse, the publishing, went back to Southern California, the Vista Association, 1961 to 1970. Then they decided to relocate eastward to Salem and were there for a period of 4 years. And then, because of a usurpation by Don Adair, there was a split, and the brethren relocated back in Yucaipa in the period from 1974 to 86. A group that had been kicked out of Salem were reorganized around Mountaindale, and the Yucaipa group joined Mountaindale in 1986, and they continued there until Mountaindale broke apart in 2005. So that was the succession of storehouses, Mountaindale being the 6th iteration of Universal Publishing, but after Mountaindale, the 7th is now worldwide to reach these 22 million Seventh-day Adventists. The idea that the storehouse can only be in the domain of the two-horned beast based on 8-track 24 is absolutely false. I challenge you, brethren, go read 8-track page 24. The headquarters is not talking about GADSDA or Mount Carmel Center or Bashan Pasture. The headquarters is talking about the General Conference Seventh-day Adventists located in Silver Spring, Maryland. Go look it up for yourself. So they bought a lie coming from Don Adair, and they continue to think that the headquarters has to be located in the U.S. That's patently false. So we're in this scattering period. the Carmel pasture started in 1930 and will conclude in Ezekiel 9. And so over this sweep of time, we had the section of Old Mount Carmel Center under Brother Houteff that declined after he died in 55. Faithful Davidians reorganized in 61, Vista, and then we go through the succession of storehouses under the Carmel pasture that kept alive the original Shepherd's Rod period tract literature. Salem, Yucaipa, Mountaindale, and now through the ministry of UPA7.org, publishing houses worldwide. This will take us up until the kingdom. And then that's where the future gospel headquarters will be. So in this scattering period, we have multiple publishing houses to reach these 22 plus million Seventh-day Adventists. Go read 7 Testimony, page 140. Actually read the whole section, page 138 to 150. You'll hear the principal concept of the work of the fourth angel that joins the three and gives it power and force will be largely through our publishing houses, plural. It's clearly identified, multiple publishing houses. So the role of the publishing literature, this is clearly identified in the Rod. Timely Greetings, Volume 1, number 17, page 5. It reads, Then, too, spiritual latter rain must fall as freely and without cost to the recipients as does literal rain. Thus, it is to have never before has the world witnessed so much absolutely free literature scattered away as this literature is. Millions. So it is that these small comprehensive publications, the bright clouds laden with present truth, are now being scattered as leaves of autumn throughout Laodicea to every church member, to every one grass in the vineyard of the Lord. The final results? More than 1,000 attest inspiration will soon be converted in one day, most of whom will trace their first convictions to the reading of our publications. So you see here, brethren, that this principle is directly applicable today. Most Seventh-day Adventists will trace their convictions to reading of their publications. What publications? The original Shepherd's Rod tracts, the same ones that were published by Brother Houteff when he published this in Timely Greetings in 1946. Not remodeled, altered, compiled, or otherwise corrupted literature, but the original. So Bashan cannot fulfill this role because they don't publish the original. They publish all this counterfeit. We've documented Series A tracts, Series B tracts, tracts 16 through 19, and you're going, what? Where did this stuff come from? Well, it certainly didn't come from the original Shepherd's Rod. It came from the brain of M.J. Bingham. So they pass all this stuff out because they're ashamed of the prophet. They want to hide the identifying marks of the Shepherd's Rod, and they repackage it. This is the same spirit that inspired Florence Houteff to remodel the Rod literature. Comes straight from hell. And taking Shepherd's Rod Volume 2, which they don't believe in, and they cut it up into pieces and published tracts 16 through 19. Did you know that? Well, this certainly wasn't done by Brother Houteff. That's Bashan's idea, to chop up Shepherd's Rod book, Volume 2, and cut it in and publish these tracts, unauthorized. Why not publish the original? And the original is here. Thank God. In UPA 7, you can publish all 75 pieces of tracts literature, tracts 1 to 15, miscellaneous tracts, Timely Greetings, Volume 1, Volume 2, answer books 1 to 5, and the original Old Symbolic Codes. And here's a composite of the cover artwork of those original tract literature. There's only one original. Anything else is a counterfeit. So this is what God mandates us to publish as the leaves of autumn, to scatter throughout Laodicea to every grass in the field, that they might have an opportunity to become acquainted with the truth. That's the mandate. So, in conclusion, what can we summarize here? Trevor Bingham's open warfare on the lineage of Carmel associations from 1962 up to the present day is a desperate effort to tear down the work that God is leading today to reach 22 plus million Seventh-day Adventists around the world with the original Shepherd's Rod message. Trevor is attempting to bury the real open apostasy of Bashan for failing to print the original Shepherd's Rod tract literature and teaching a host of false doctrines, most notably the Bashan pasture heresy cooked up in the brain of M.J. Bingham. Bashan, along with other Carmel associations, Salem, Mountaindale, and Waco, do not, I repeat, do not believe in establishing Rod publishing houses around the world, but rather attempt to rule the world from their single headquarter location in the United States, based on a misinterpretation of 8-track page 24. God abhors any man or small group of men, some executive council or a porter or whoever, exercising kingly authority over his work. Do you remember what happened in Battle Creek in 1902? When the leading men attempted to rule over God's heritage? What did God do? He broke it all up. And the sanitarium and the Review and Herald burned to the ground. These are warning calls, brethren. You try to control God's work, he'll break it up. Beware. Neutrality in this issue, brethren, is not an option. Let us read Testimonies, Volume 3, page 282. What astonishing deception and fearful blindness had, like a dark cloud, covered Israel. How about Davidians today? This blindness and apostasy had not closed about them suddenly. It had come up upon them gradually, as they had not heeded the word of reproof and warning which the Lord had sent to them because of their pride and their sins. And now, in this fearful crisis, in the presence of the idolatrous priest and the apostate king, they remained neutral. If God abhors one sin above another of which his people are guilty, it is doing nothing in the case of an emergency. Indifference and neutrality in a religious crisis is regarded of God as a grievous crime and equal to the very worst type of hostility against God. Brethren, this is not an issue to stand by in indifference and neutrality. This is an absolute emergency. God desires to reach 22 million Seventh-day Adventists around the world with multiple publishing houses. And anybody that stands up and opposes this or is indifferent or neutral, God will count this as a grievous crime and the worst hostility against heaven. So wake up, separate from this apostasy and error, and get busy doing the work that God would have us to do. Set up publishing in your country. Those 70 Adventists need to hear the rod through the original publications. So this concludes our presentation. If you have any further questions, comments on the subject, then please subscribe to this channel, Universal Publishing, for future updates and reports that you won't hear anywhere else. And to request copies of original tract literature if you don't have it, or for assistance to establish your own original Shepherd's Rod publishing house in your area, in your country, then please let us know. Feel free to contact us anytime. That's what we're in the business for. We don't want to rule over you. We don't come to take your tithes like they do. We'll help you set up your own and get dependent on God, and we'll just share with you what you need to do to get started. That's it. We don't rule over you. We have no priests. We have no prophets. We have no ministers. We have no vice presidents. We have no porters. We're simple laymen, self-supporting Bible workers, advancing the work according to the will of God. So you can contact us. Here's our email, telephone number. You can text, call, or contact us through WhatsApp. Visit our website, whiteparish.org. So brethren, wake up, separate from error, close the door of apostasy, and advance toward the future gospel headquarters in the kingdom, and be candidates of the 144,000, the future gospel headquarters that will give the loud cry. We thank you for your time. May God richly bless your search for truth as for hidden treasure, and to cease ye from man, whose breath is in his nostrils. Godspeed.